Okay. Well, good afternoon, National Museum of American History, Smithsonian colleagues, and National Endowment for the Arts guests. Welcome to another presentation of the Smithsonian Staff Learning Series, where we explore the trends, topics, and research relating to the public so that we may better understand our current and future audiences. My name is Adam Rozan. I'm the Director of Programs Audience Development at the National Museum of American History and your host and moderator for the series. Today's talk examines wellness, a topic of daily interest, importance, and concern to Americans today. Wellness, as defined by the Global Wellness Institute, is the active pursuit of activities, choices, and the lifestyle that leads to a state of holistic health. Our speakers today, Sunil Iyengar and Bill O'Brien from the National Endowment for the Arts, will share more insights on the state of wellness today and that of Americans' well-being overall through their work in these areas. Now, let me tell you about our speakers. Sunil Iyengar is the Director of the Office of Research and Analysis, where he has established award-winning programs, including the NEA Research Lab Initiative. He chairs a federal interagency task force on the arts and human development. He oversees research partnerships with the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, among other entities. You can also find Sunil each month on NEA's Measure for Measure and Quick Study podcasts. Bill O'Brien is a Senior Advisor for Innovation and is the Director of Creative Forces, a project that partners with the Departments of Defense and Veteran Affairs to improve the health, well-being, and quality of life for military and veteran populations exposed to trauma, as well as their families and caregivers. The program places creative arts therapies at the core of patient-centered care at nationwide clinics sites, including telehealth services. It increases access to community arts activities to promote health, well-being, and quality of life for military service members, veterans, and their families and caregivers. In addition to other accolades and accomplishments, Bill is also an actor and appeared on all 7 seasons as Kenny Thurman, Marlee Matlin's interpreter on NBC's The West Wing, if that's not cool enough. As you listen to today's talk, please think about what questions, ideas, or insights you can bring back to your colleagues in the projects you're working on here at the Smithsonian or the National Endowment for the Arts. Please note that this discussion is being recorded with closed captioning, and I'll be helping our speakers by moderating the chat, so please add your questions there. For Smithsonian colleagues, I'll also share links to upcoming talks and other information on the series, and I encourage you to visit the Smithsonian Wellness page on PRISM. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Sunil and Bill. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam, and hello, Smithsonian staff. I think it's fair to say that Bill and I and many of those who work at the National Endowment for the Arts are big fans of you all. We're here today to talk about some of the NEA's investments in the arts and health space. I'm the research director of the NEA. My own short talk will focus on some of our work with other federal agencies, and I'll share a little research about museums in particular. Then I'll turn it over to Bill O'Brien, who'll go deep into an initiative we have called Creative Forces, and he'll also show highlights from a virtual exhibit. So let me just go to the next slide here. Bear with me. I'm trying to move this thing. The screen is kind of, there we go. So this is my brief agenda. I'll give a general overview of some of our activities, but I hope to land on some recent and ongoing research on museums in particular. I also wanted to draw attention to this hyperlink at the bottom of the slide. It goes to a detailed list and infographic of the NEA's investments in arts and health. So I encourage you to take a look later, not now, and see if any of these resources are helpful to you in your own work. So more than a decade ago, leadership from the NEA and the Department of Health and Human Services got together to see if we could form a federal interagency working group to catalyze research and information sharing about the arts and health and well-being across the lifespan. This became the Interagency Task Force on the Arts and Human Development. We meet quarterly to share ideas and insights. Plus, members have been pairing off to do various research workshops and reports from time to time, with the idea of making visible across the federal government how the arts contribute to health and human development outcomes. You'll note the Smithsonian logo is included here. That's because we're honored to have Joanne Flores from the Office of the Undersecretary for Museums and Culture as one of our members. So hi, Joanne, if you're out there. And over the years, we've produced a series of research reports, often in partnership with other member agencies, on topics ranging from the arts and early childhood development, to arts and aging, to most recently a report on the arts and substance abuse, substance use disorders and pain management, really about the opioid crisis. As it happens, with the arrival of COVID, federal interagency efforts around health and well-being only accelerated. HHS led a separate interagency working group effort to produce a plan allowing for federal agencies to become more strategic in offering services for what's called equitable long-term recovery and resilience. At the core of this plan is the vital conditions for health and well-being framework shown here. What's remarkable to me, having worked at the NEA and around these issues for years, is how comprehensively arts and culture have been woven throughout this report. You'll find recommendations in it about how arts strategies can assist with reaching so many of the goals in this circle, whether we talk about belonging and civic muscle. You can certainly see the Smithsonian there, lifelong learning, also meaningful work and wealth, or basic needs for health and safety. In fact, just last week, our chair visited with the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion at HHS to discuss this plan. It coincides roughly with an executive order that President Biden issued last year that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. It was about promoting the arts, the humanities, and museum and library services, and it talked about the role of these agencies in improving government services nationwide. The order calls for the arts to be, quote, integrated into strategies, policies, and programs that advance the economic development, well-being, and resilience of all communities, especially those that have historically been underserved. And incidentally, this tracks with the NEA, a goal of the NEA's strategic plan, which is to integrate the arts with strategies to promote the well-being and resilience of people and communities. To me, a good example of this work in practice is a partnership that began 2 years ago between the NEA and the CDC and CDC Foundation to improve public confidence in vaccination. The initiative gave grants to 30 nonprofit organizations nationwide so that artists and arts and culture bearers working with various media could contribute to more timely uptake of vaccines. Partly, the CDC Museum in Atlanta is featuring some of the artwork and art strategies through an exhibit that our chair attended earlier this month. And beyond the arts' role in public health, we've been privileged to work with the National Institutes of Health to support research and practice in music and health. Then director of the NIH, Francis Collins, and the famed soprano, Renee Fleming, along with the NEA and the Kennedy Center, began an initiative called Sound Health, seeking to invest more strategically in research about music's applications for health and well-being. One milestone has been a series of NIH research grants co-supported by the NEA. The press release is shown here. Additionally, the Kennedy Center has hosted workshops and performances around this theme. For our part, the NEA launched a national resource center called the Sound Health Network in partnership with the University of California, San Francisco to help promote research and public awareness about music's impact on health and wellness. The transdisciplinary makeup of this group reflects the richness of this growing field. Co-directed by Jolene Johnson, a neurologist and researcher from UCSF's School of Nursing, and Charles Lim, an otolaryngologist, can't believe I pronounced that correctly, and a musician who has pioneered studies of creativity in the brain. The team also features Sherry Robb, a music therapist and researcher at Indiana University, and Indre Viscontas, a neuroscientist and music and science communications expert, who's also an opera singer and director. I think I refer to Jolene as a neurologist. She's actually a neuroscientist, I should have said. So I encourage you to check out their website, which hosts an online directory of researchers and practitioners, a virtual networking platform, a clearinghouse of research reports and publications, a newsletter, periodic webinars, announcements of funding opportunities, and many, many other resources. Now, I'm going to spend the final part of my talk in considering recent research on museums and well-being. These 3 bullets are by no means comprehensive. It's a laughably brief list, but these are a few items that have been touchstones for me. The most recent was published last summer, an article by Oliver Boucher and his Montreal-based research team in geriatric medicine, seeking to understand how museum visits might improve social well-being for adults during the pandemic, especially for older adults. The team conducted a randomized controlled study in conjunction with the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Older adults were assigned to either a 3-month cycle of virtual weekly tours of the museum or to a control group. At the end of the intervention, those who had gone on virtual tours tested lower on measures of social isolation and frailty and did better in well-being and quality of life measures. Another study done a couple of years ago was supported by one of our fellow agencies, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This mixed method study done by a reinvestment fund University of Pennsylvania's Social Impact of the Arts Project, and HRNA advisors found quantitative and qualitative evidence of the co-location of libraries and museums with public benefits, such as community health, school effectiveness, institutional connections, and cultural opportunities. The third study here was published almost a decade ago. Jay Green and his team of researchers at the University of Arkansas studied the educational value of field trips, specifically to Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, Northwest Arkansas. The study was another randomized controlled trial, and it featured nearly 11,000 students from 3rd to 12th grade and 489 teachers at 123 different schools. Students received a 1-hour guided tour during which they viewed and discussed 5 paintings on average. Other students had their field trip opportunity deferred for the following semester, but the students who took the field trips for the intervention ended up showing greater increases in empathy, tolerance, and critical thinking skills. And the benefits were larger for those who came from disadvantaged communities. We've since funded this researcher's work on the benefits of attending multiple arts field trips during the school year. Now I want to share some early findings from an NEA research lab, or a research center we fund at the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. The UPenn researchers used the Open Gallery for Arts Research, pioneered by Rebecca Rodriguez Borwinkle at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and her colleagues. This is a free open source tool for studying visitor behavior within an online gallery environment. The UPenn team randomized a representative US sample of 687 participants into one of, get this, 9 conditions, either an active control group where they read about art but did not attend the online gallery, and 8 other viewing groups, depending on the types of instructions they got about how to view the art, how to engage with the artworks. These ranged from what's called mindful viewing to curious viewing to social viewing, and further varied by whether the instructions called for slow looking and or viewing from an immersive mindset. The artworks were sampled from the Philadelphia Museum of Art's catalog. The researchers wanted to see if any of these viewing habits were associated with human flourishing outcomes. Human flourishing is the concept, psychological construct that's being studied by the Positive Psychology Center at Penn. Based on their data collection and analysis, it seems that the viewing protocols did not affect changes in flourishing across all the conditions. However, further analysis showed that the quality of immersion in the gallery visits did predict some changes in specific aspects of human flourishing, namely engagement, a sense of meaning, and self-satisfaction with autonomy. Now, these effects, it should be noted, the effect sizes weren't huge, but at the same time, the study did open the door to more investigation of the phenomenon of immersion in viewing art exhibits, in this case defined as slow looking, or spending relatively more time engaging with a single artwork. Catherine Cotter and her team have research coming out in the journal Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts to understand this mechanism further. In fact, these are some of the psychological well-being outcomes that they've witnessed in people who had done the 15-minute gallery tour. They also found that greater immersion in the artwork tended to predict such outcomes among the virtual gallery viewers. So with that, I'll just give you a taste of some of the research going on there at UPenn, being supported by the NEA, and love to answer any questions at the end of all this, but I'll turn it over now, if that's okay, to Bill. Thanks, Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Sunil. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. I assume you can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, Smithsonian colleagues. My name is Bill O'Brien. I'm the Senior Advisor for Innovation and the Director of Creative Forces at the National Endowment for the Arts. And today I'm here to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs called Creative Forces, NEA Military Healing Arts Network. We've been working on this partnership for about a little over 10 years now, and the focus is to improve health, well-being, and quality of life for military and veteran populations who've been exposed to trauma, including families and caregivers. And we do this in both clinical and community settings, as well as standing up some capacity building support for stakeholders in both arenas. We started as a clinical program, which was kind of a unique departure for the agency back in 2012 when we began. Sunil had mentioned that the mission statement that we have now really it goes right out of the gate, talking about how we are elevating our ability to understand how the arts can contribute to well-being and resilience for individuals and communities across the country. But 10 years ago, we weren't really as focused on that. And I think, from conversations with Adam and some other folks at Smithsonian, it feels like these themes of well-being and resilience and how the arts can contribute to them is of growing interest across the arts sectors. We really started this as a clinically focused program, and our partnership began in the DoD with the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And they were just beginning to stand up these National Intrepid Centers of Excellence. The first one was at Walter Reed, and then there are these NICO satellites that have cropped up across the country. We were really intrigued by the approach that they were looking at, that it was in response to some urgent issues for the military health system. If you can just think, 10 years ago was eons ago in terms of even the term PTSD not really being that common. And the focus here was to develop an integrative, complementary approach that would include both some of the traditional Western medicine approaches, psychotherapy, speech therapy, et cetera, along with more complementary or alternative approaches like creative arts therapies, yoga, acupuncture, et cetera. And included in that effort was research and education so that we can understand better how each of these different types of modalities can contribute to the healing efforts. And so we were both very intrigued by what we could be bringing to the table to respond to these issues for the military, and also to understand better for ourselves what the role of the arts could play in these kinds of efforts. Last year, we also expanded the initiative to include a focus on community engagement. So we announced a national grant program. We have 26 projects that are being funded currently. We're reviewing another round of projects that will be announced in this summer. And the idea is really to kind of expand out into community settings or community-based settings, similar efforts to support health and well-being for military-connected populations, but in a very community-based way. So really thinking about what the role that the arts and arts providers could be playing, and as well as conducting research that we've been organizing for a while now to understand what the health benefits would be for community-based arts. And then we'd mentioned there's also a National Resource Center, and I'll have the link of that towards the end of the presentation. But this is an online platform that is meant to provide capacity building support for stakeholders in both our clinical and community settings. But it's also there for other folks who are interested in doing similar work and interested in leveraging the arts to promote health and resilience for military connected populations. One of the key things that anyone can explore there are some of the key clinical research findings that we've run across over the last 10 years or so. Especially the last 5 years, we've been conducting quite a bit of research with our DoD and VA partners. We've had more than 22 peer-reviewed clinical research papers published since 2016. We have a couple more in the pipeline that will be published soon. And some of the key findings that you can read about, you can dig in as deeply as you'd like to or you have interest in. But some of the key ones are the ability to recover from traumatic experiences through meaning making and positive reframing and verbal processing that can be initiated through art making experiences, reducing symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, eventually, hopefully, being able to experience hope and gratification through the art making process, and reduce isolation and stigma. On the community engagement side, as I'd mentioned, we're also very interested in trying to understand the benefits and impacts that are brought to participants for the military connected folks, their families and caregivers as well. to understand what they're getting out of it, what kinds of well-being associated benefits could we be tracking across this grant program. So we have a series of surveys that are required or that will be required in upcoming rounds, and we're kind of testing those surveys on this first round. But the themes that we're looking at, trying to understand from the participant standpoint, the types of things that we'll be looking for are how creative expression can build a better understanding of yourself and of others, how these programs and these activities can improve social connectedness and a sense of belonging, how it can also promote resilience. And the way that we're looking at that is the ability to bounce back from stress or unexpected life events. And then lastly, the support independence and successful adaptation to civilian life, which has been tracked in lots of different ways through the VA and other agency efforts. What we're looking at here specifically is how art making and getting involved in these arts programs can help promote a sense of a shared sense of mission and purpose and self-worth that can promote positively adapting and readjusting to civilian life. I did want to mention very quickly on the National Resource Center, you can also explore our Healing the Invisible Wounds of War online exhibit. This was a pivot that we made on March 18th, 2020. I think you can probably guess where I'm heading here. We had organized a live exhibit. It was going to be the first large exhibit in the large entryway of the Kennedy Center's at the time fairly new Reach Pavilion. We had pulled together artworks that had been created in our clinical clinics across the country, and they were staged alongside statements about the work from the vantage point of the patients and or their creative arts therapists. So if you go into the exhibit, you can see my mouse here. If you hover over any of these, a statement about the work will pop up, a quote from the patient talking about what themes are being explored in these artworks, or also what they personally felt the value was for them in the actual process of making the art. I also wanted to mention this because as we were pivoting into an online exhibit, we did a pretty hard scan of some of the best models we could find online for online exhibits. And the one that we liked the most was actually a Smithsonian exhibit called The Americans at the National Museum of American Indians. And I just picked up the phone and called Paul Chatt, who I read was involved with that. And he kind of talked me through what their approach was. And it was tremendously inspiring to see how they were able to help unpack some fairly complicated themes associated with the American indigenous experience, and for us to kind of pull out some of the more complicated themes that we wanted to kind of bring to light and explore with our audiences. And the key thing that we kind of stole from that exhibit is, you'll see in the bottom here, there's different channels you can punch, and I'm just going to go into one of them, Pathway to Healing. If you hit that button, you'll come to this page, and I can't do it on a PowerPoint, but you can scroll down. It's meant to be sort of a pathway. And what we're doing here is replicating in a way the experience of military and veteran patients who've come through these programs in kind of the trajectory of healing from early stage to later stage to middle stage to later stages. And we conducted through remote video teams, asking questions over Zoom, produced a number of small videos. I'll show one of those in a minute, that also kind of allows us to hear directly from veterans who've come through this program. In each of the stages in this particular channel, right here I'm showing the early stage. We'll have some representative artworks that we think do a good job of communicating, what's happening at this early stage. In the early stage is where most frequently the patients are really coming to terms with the themes that have been vexing for them before they entered into this program. And they're using the art platform specifically to kind of just unpack them and understand them and see them. So it's really just the ability to see and understand some of these complex issues. And then we also, within each of these stages, we have some links down towards the bottom that you can see that can take you to associated research papers if you want to dig deeper into what we're kind of driving forward in terms of what the underlying science of some of these themes are and some of these healing impacts. I'm going to just conclude here with a short video. This features 3 of the veterans who contributed to the exhibit and sort of sharing in their own words what the art making process meant for them and their healing efforts. This is actually the 1-minute video from the later stage of healing. And that's where, hopefully, after a few weeks of working not just with creative arts therapists, but the other folks in the integrative care system, they have reached a point where they're able to experience hope and gratification and express that through their artwork. So I'll now turn the mic over to our veteran graduates of the program.
All of those kinds of things, kind of came out in the artistic process, but also dealing with it did, and then accepting those things and understanding and growing from those things. It's probably the only, meaning art and art therapy, are probably one of the only things that I've had in my life that I would equate to post-traumatic growth.
And now that I can reflect back on that, I could give myself some advice and say, it's going to be okay. You're going to go through some things, but you're not by yourself.
My therapist was able to introduce me to that and really show me where I was able to heal by utilizing music, was able to heal by utilizing the arts. I was able to see it, feel it, and I knew it made me better.
Great. We do have, if you want to stay updated on all the different things happening with Creative Forces, if you go to the National Resource Center and do a /subscribe at the end, you can sign up and we'll be forwarding alerts as they come up. So that's it for me. We look forward to having a conversation with you folks. And
Well, thank you.
Yep,
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Bill, and thank you, Sunil. I really appreciate the presentations and the kind of the look that Sunil provided us on the state of wellness and kind of some of the research and what's going on in the museum field. Also, Bill, kind of digging into the work that you're doing with military folks, current active duty and veterans. I'd love to hear some questions. Please do put them in the chat. In the interim, can I ask you both, or either of you, let's talk, what are you learning? What are you learning? How is this impacting the work at the NEA, and how what are you thinking about this in terms of the American public? That's different than maybe pre-pandemic or even middle of the pandemic when you all did the exhibition. But really, let's talk about audiences. So let's focus there.
I can offer some thoughts and then.
Please.
Is it okay, Bill?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I think has really pervaded a lot of the discourse about how can we help through health and the connection between arts and health. For many years, when, again, just looking from the research vantage point, we were doing a lot of research, and we still do, on individual health benefits, large scale studies or small scale studies of individuals and the benefits of the arts in some health instrumental way for health. I think we're recognizing the need for that, but also increasingly community health and public health, and making a stronger connection to public health. And I think some of that was born out of experience of going through the pandemic, but I think a lot of it also, what's kind of running throughout all this research now, more and more so, is being acutely sensitive to the culture, the populations we're studying, and the sort of the community culture of the communities. And really, this is very much hand in hand with the conversation all the federal agencies are having about equity. So, for example, when we look to do something with the arts and public health, or we talk to our federal agency partners, the focus is very much not on just building back to normal or some kind of baseline state of health that somehow we all want to be at. It's more about also improving opportunities for the communities to help themselves and empowering communities in giving them a voice in their community discourse about public health and access to opportunity, and in sort of bridging the gaps, the public health disparities that we saw so rife with COVID. So I would say community health, more of an accent on community health, as well as equity, or some of the themes that are kind of emerging for us anyway. What about you, Bill?
That's great. Bill, do you want to add to that, or do you want to take the question that we have here from Megan Smith, who asks about what is it about viewing art and museum objects that promote health and community growth? And Megan, we appreciate the question.
That's a really interesting question, and it's actually one of the key researchers that we've been partnering with, Garija Kamal, who is with the PhD department at Drexel University. It's one of, perhaps the only higher education institution that has a PhD program in multiple creative arts therapy disciplines. Anyway, she's been talking about this for quite a while, her interest in doing research on what the impact is for the audience to engage with this kind of work. So, I don't want to leap too far ahead and pretend I know what science will uncover on that, but what I will say from a very personal experience is that in a lot of ways, it allows us to see each other as humans. I mean, that's kind of an integral part about the arts. I think that most of us have probably had a kind of an instinctual appreciation of for many years. But in this case, I think at first it seemed novel to a lot of the people that I work with at the NEA, that there would be some sort of an arts military connection. And I think in some ways it can be reflected in the first outcome that we're looking at in the community engagement side, the ability to see others and to understand, to feel like you understand them better, and the ability to be seen by others and to feel better understood. I think for me, if there's one thing that I would say is the biggest takeaway about working for 10 years on this kind of a project, is that prior to that, I had been working at the agency for a few years. I was the director for theater and musical theater. And before that, I was a theater producer. And then before that, I was acting on stages, et cetera. And I had really gotten to be a little bit myopic, I think, in terms of who I was thinking of when I thought about who's involved in the arts or who is an artist. I think this kind of reminded me that we all are. Everyone is an artist, and the impulse to make art is everywhere, not just in the art sector that we've been funding for 30 some years prior to this program, but that there's a capacity for anyone to engage in the arts, even if they didn't think they were an artist, and that the impulse to make art could be just practically anything, mostly to understand things better. But in a case like this, to really be able to apply that in an intentional way, I think has been fairly profound for me. And then the last thing I'll say that I think has really been a healthy thing for the agency and for me personally is it just sort of changes the conversation. It kind of takes it out of the culture wars that we can sometimes feel like we're engaged in involuntarily. In this case, the people who care about and who are supportive of this type of an effort really kind of spans across types of ideologies. Go ahead.
Great. Bill, please, Sunil, what were you going to say?
Just one quick thing Bill said that I thought resonated too is this concept of what viewing does. So art making definitely has its own kind of associated benefits, if you will, and kind of what people get out of it. And it can overlap with viewing or observing, but some of the things around viewing that strike me as really relevant here is around empathy. There's been some research on that in particular, and not just empathy in a generic sense, but understanding different groups. And so getting back to what we talked about, diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a study we funded a while back at Occidental College. I'll put it in the chat. It basically was looking at Native American photographic exhibits and measuring how people who view these exhibits and went through this exhibit started to, after the process, were relating to those people from those cultures and lowering their tendency to stereotype and that sort of thing. Now, we can't expect the world out of one visit or anything like that, but I think that the persistent process, the process of cumulatively of engaging with arts and culture in this way does have that opportunity to really take you out of yourself and to identify also with other groups who may not, and that might be a great way in some of the public health problems we're facing.
That's great. Sunil, I'm going to ask two questions at once. Can you comment a little bit more about what you were saying, how the NEA is listening and trying to hear from the public and to get that feedback in terms of figuring out how you are responding to communities? And we have a question that says, have you given any thought to sharing the Creative Forces model to other countries for their veterans? So two questions there.
You want to take the Creative Forces one while I think of an answer to the other one?
Sure. Yeah, actually, we've been involved in some conversations that were exactly meant to share out military medical advances across the 22 allied countries that were involved in the Afghan and Iraq wars. And that was a really interesting conversation. So there, I think it may be in the middle of, or may have gone through an evolution, but it was at the time that we were invited to present at the Uniformed Services University Health University at Walter Reed. There were people from all of those different military health systems coming to kind of share out the kinds of issues they were dealing with, and PTSD was, kind of a vexing one for all of them. It was really interesting for us to hear from some of what we might kind of infer as being less advanced technologically, for example, places like the Republic of Georgia, but they took such a quick sort of almost from an indigenous standpoint, take on how some of these culture-based activities, mask making and that kind of thing, those types of things have been happening in human civilizations for thousands of years. And you can kind of see that there used to be, I think, less of a siloed way of looking at arts and science, in two different ways. Actually, this gets back to getting back to the earlier question from Megan. If there's one big takeaway on what is the impact, or how is this sort of, what is the healing impact, et cetera, one of the best quotes I was able to find in all of the lit reviews we've done is over 2,000 years old, from Aristotle. He was a man of medicine first. That was his family's business. As he expanded into all of these other types of domains that he became very expert in, he also became, as Sunil has once mentioned, perhaps the most influential theater critic of all time. But he mentioned something that I thought was really germane to this work, which is that the outcome of catharsis is bringing intellectual clarity to emotional chaos. Mm. We could look at Rothko, we could listen to a Hank Williams song, we can hear that happening, all the time, but that's kind of the agent at work here. It's this meaning making and sense making. And in terms of trauma processing, to be able to do that in a safe way, in a safe space, does really have, it is an elixir, I believe, very strongly. It has a healing impact to take these chaotic kinds of themes that are rolling around in your head and keeping you awake at night, and allowing you to really take control of them, put them in front of you, shape them into a clay piece or whatever.
Yeah, and I thought the question that Bill was fielding was going to go in the direction of what other areas of trauma or other public health problems can Creative Forces be applied to. And I know there's a lot of applicability there. But I wanted to quickly answer the question you asked, Adam. And so reframing it, I think you're asking, the question was, what kinds of avenues are there for people to engage with the NEA around some of this work, if I'm getting that right? Or
yes, how are you all listening? If I understood correctly,
how are you listening? Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, how are you listening?
So there's a couple of ways. One thing is, we are primarily our chair has been really Maria Rosario Jackson, who's done a lot actually in the area of arts and public health, has been really promoting this idea of us as a national resource. We're not just a grant-making agency. That said, a lot of our bread and butter work is grant-making. So in a way, part of the ways we listen are looking at the proposals that come in over the transit for our programs. So one program in particular, in addition to research, which gets its own grants, there's a program called Our Town, which is very much about bringing arts, design, and culture to bear on community, what's called creative placemaking. And essentially, bringing artists at the forefront of community planning and economic development, and really true integration. And it's got a very much a systems view. And not only does the program tend to inspire that kind of modus operandi, of listening and have really community engaged participatory work, community engaged research and that sort of thing. But also, we are learning a lot from the kinds of applications we see and the demand for different kinds of arts infused programs. And so certainly a lot of that does involve health and what the chair calls arts infused civic infrastructure. So that's a whole domain where, through our grant making, we try to observe what's coming in and catch trends that way. But we also listen in other ways. I think one of the things that gives us this platform is doing these interagency working groups where we sometimes will systematically reach out to the field and get feedback and advice. And particularly with this equitable long-term recovery and resilience plan, that's a long-term, but ELTRR, if you want to know the acronym, which HHS is really led, but it's an interagency group. And this new plan really did benefit from listening sessions and is going to prompt further listening about how the arts, not just the arts, but a lot of different agency services can be more fully integrated into a plan for longer term health outcomes versus just short-term urgent services, which is often the way a lot of these resources are deployed. Like if there's a hurricane, or something, and we go out and we immediately give some grants or do something there, that's great. But what's going to tie, what kind of protective factors can you build into a community through the arts and other strategies? And so that type of long-term listening is more of a challenge, especially when we're so busy day to day executing programs, but we're continually keeping it in mind.
One thing that was really interesting, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you both and have you present is the focus that you have on wellness, well-being, and health. I wonder if you both could talk a little bit more about that to give the audiences for here and those who are going to watch the recording a little bit better understanding of the state of America today and Americans around wellness, well-being, and their health and those important topics, because clearly it's a topic of daily interest in the news and much discussed, and whether you're at a company or organization or in the general public. So love some of your thoughts there.
One thought occurs to me, and I'm giving Bill time to think, is what we often hear in public health. The public health moves at the speed of trust, right? And trust, I think, and erosions in trust for institutions. This has been widely reported. Whether it's for the media, for government, or foundations, this kind of some sense of. So what I'm getting at here, Adam, is rather than diagnose the health problems in terms of physiological or psychological conditions, I think one dimension we have to make part of the arts conversation, the health conversation, and the arts are a way of doing that, is what we're referring to sort of as civic engagement or social cohesion and civic infrastructure, if you will. It doesn't have to be bricks and mortar, but what are those clusters of activity, in the arts, we often call it, I want to say naturally occurring cultural districts, or, places where, there may be an indigenous art form, or there may be a neighborhood cultural more, or something that's, really caught on. And how do those communities, how can they be mobilized not only to, experience art and enjoy art and create art, but to also engage in conversations that we're going to improve our ability to talk to each other, to share ideas, to bond and bridge. So I'm kind of, I guess I'm not really answering it directly, but I do feel that one of the first places I go when I think about the public health is this concept of trust. And do we have enough trust in providers, in the the systems working and how can the arts be part of the social and civic fabric to help to improve overall health and well-being measures?
Yeah, I think maybe what I would add is I've been, it's been endlessly fascinating to be able to be in conversation with some really smart people at the DoD and the VA who are thinking about health in a way that we hadn't traditionally at the agency. It's an interesting thing for us to have partnered with them to organize a response to something that is of high concern to them and high concern across society. So I think one of the things that we could be thinking about now, and we have been thinking about for a few years, is how could we bring this same kind of approach and aim it at another issue that is important and is demanding some kind of a response. So we've been looking, before the epidemic, we were looking at things like substance abuse, thinking about how that could have a long tail with the opioid epidemic. And we've been looking at things like adverse childhood events. We know that the arts can play a really strong role in improving, the future trajectories for folks. And a kind of a natural one for us for a while now has been looking at disaster relief and first responders. And in all of those, thinking about how the clinic and community approach can be considered as a coordinated response. And I think for the arts sector, there really is a heightened interest and concern around health and well-being and where you could be tending to it. And one of the things that Sarah Cass, retired Navy captain and family doctor, is our senior advisor for military medicine at Creative Forces, and she's overseeing all of the clinical programs. And something she talks about is how we are looking at a future of medicine where it's less sort of contained within a conversation with your clinician at a medical facility, and we're thinking about it more broadly and more holistically. The VA has similar approaches around their whole health program. And it's really thinking about how we live healthy and how we can provide ourselves with as much support for our own well-being that we can, and opening up our sort of eyes to where that kind of activity can happen. So when we are feeling divided, I do think social connection and belonging is something that comes up over and over again, and that can be applied to lots of different kinds of polarized life that we're living. But the ability to think about things in this meaning-making, processed way that art just naturally brings, it allows us to think about ourselves and others in a way that's kind of removed a little bit from the day, and hopefully plugs us in and makes us feel a little bit more like we have each other's backs. I think that's a key healthy indicator. Healthy countries feel like others have their back and they have theirs too. And I think when we think about the arts in a military context, that's a common theme. It's, thinking about yourself in a broader context, being a part of something bigger than yourself. That's absolutely at the core of military service, but it's, I think, at the core of the impulse to make art as well.
Right. Sunil, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think, thinking over, having the luxury to listen to, try to, think about what I said in relation to what Bill said. One other thing that I think, if I were to look at a couple of like the Surgeon General has issued two particular areas where he thinks there's a real need to dig in there and combat what he considers a real public health crisis or problem. One is youth mental health, and one is loneliness, social connect, and looking and how can we improve social connectedness. And youth mental health, maybe that was foreseeable. People would elevate that to a public health matter, and it's good that it is. But loneliness and social connectedness, we're just glad that somebody's thinking of those things. Because I think the arts has a lot to do in both of those categories, but I also think it's pretty symptomatic of the things we're seeing out. A lot of times, some of the social turmoil and issues that are happening. But I wouldn't say it's only youth mental health. I think there's probably a broader frame there. But I definitely think he's right. There's that emphasis on it in terms of initiatives. But yeah, those are the things, two of those categories I think that the arts have a lot of resonance with.
Yeah, it's clear that you all have seen and understand and can clearly articulate the impact of the arts, and I think this audience would agree with you. I wonder if you can share more about what you learned, what you've learned, and what you are learning from the veterans and the active duty personnel who are involved in these programs, in terms of telling us about who are these audiences, how is this impacting their day-to-day lives, how is it kind of moving from their care that you are providing to them and their communities out across the broader community, whether it's military veteran or the general public. I wonder if you can give us some more insights on those audiences for this talk.
Yeah, I guess a couple things that has struck me over about a decade working pretty closely with the military. My dad fought in Korea, and he was one of 12, 9 of whom served in one branch of the military or other. But I didn't grow up thinking that I was part of a military family. We grew up in a farm in Iowa. We didn't, he wasn't stationed, he wasn't career. He was drafted and fought in Korea. It's different now when we have a volunteer force, and they can be sort of out of sight in a way. So one of the things I think the early impulse for the initiative that was the precursor of Creative Forces, Operation Homecoming, was really meant as just a writing workshop to develop an anthology of stories written by military folks to help connect others to that experience. And one of the things that the previous director, John Peety, who then went on to be the chair of the NEH eventually, he mentioned to me that the thing that struck him the most was how often people who participated in those workshops expressed through letters or phone calls, et cetera, how much it meant for them just to stop for a second and use this platform to kind of sort out what this experience meant for them and how it helped improve, communication within their own families, et cetera. So getting published in the book was not the main thing, and most people didn't get published in the book. And it really kind of changed our thinking. I mean, we as Sunil well knows, we have been conditioned and created really to think about how we can elevate art in a way that is judged based on artistic excellence and artistic merit. This kind of an effort really kind of brings it back into how does this resonate with everyone anywhere. And I think that maybe the biggest takeaway for me is that the experiences that people have had as wartime veterans has equipped them to be pretty well prepared to be an artist. And much to their surprise and mine often, when you're introducing a writing program or a mask, I guess we didn't show too many of those except that were in the exhibit frame, but often there's hesitation and a quick disclaimer. I haven't written a story since I was an 8th grader. I've never written one, or I'm not an artist. I don't know how to use a brush. And then you give them the stuff and they bear down and they do it and they get to the point so quickly. I've commissioned plays, one that went to Broadway, most of them didn't. And we could sometimes spend 18 months just trying to understand what's at the root of what you want to say.
You get there right away.
And they get there right away. It's almost like an unfair advantage to get at the heart of what really matters.
Yeah, Sunil, I wonder what your thought is.
Yeah, no, I was thinking what else we've learned. I mean, it's really remarkable. I mean, the thing that's been great about the Creative Forces program is research and evaluation aren't afterthoughts. A lot of times when you do an initiative or program, you already have a vision for what you want the program to be, and you do it. And then you kind of go back and you analyze it. Well, how did we do? Do some post hoc kind of analysis. This case, it was very much a twin of the, it was like, at the hip, joined at the hip to the design and implementation of the program, and every single step that's been, well documented and researched, and, there's been evaluations, and they keep generating publications from it. So it's kind of a great example, I think, of how, to be honest, I think a lot of, forget the arts for a moment, well, don't forget the arts, but put the arts aside, but program development and design. If you're doing something in museums or where have you, or any of the Smithsonian institutions, remember to bring the evaluation and research people on board early to help think through how, help conceptualize the program and even how you're going to start measuring it, even if it's very early. Because that's what I think has led to a lot of what has become case making. I mean, we're not going out making a case, but people can easily look at the evidence and make the connections that this is a program that seems to be succeeding at a very high level for moderate kind of investment. And that sort of, that's been inspiring, I think, to a lot of folks who work at the NEA in our own shops. So in research, one of the things I was going to mention is we do, as you said, we give research grants and so forth. But a lot of times we're funding not only the research, we're funding the program or class or therapy that's being evaluated. So it's really interesting. It's not a silo kind of operation that research goes off and does their studies. It's often the researchers are working very closely with the practitioners to come up with a program that can have the most efficacious outcome for all concerned, and also can be reasonable amount of investment for that organization. So I think the NEA has tried to marry research with practice a lot more in a lot of its work.
Yeah, we've kind of developed a catchphrase that we apply a lot. I mean, the Creative Forces started out intending to be a kind of a small writing program that was embedded in the integrative care model up at Walter Reed. Within a year, we kind of shift focus to really want to understand more about art therapy and music therapy and how that can function here, and what we could be doing at our agency to help set up a really careful way of understanding how it could be applied in this kind of a setting, how it could scale and where it could scale. So the motto of learn by doing, it's sort of in some ways kind of what I've personally sort of learned, at least in my own mind, what sets the artistic process apart from, for example, the scientific method. It's so iterative, and you don't quite know until you get there. You need to be opportunistic and flexible and open to learning new things that you didn't intend. So often in most of the plays that I've produced didn't end up being the play I thought we were going to produce.
Sure.
It was better ideas that came up during rehearsal that were more compelling that we allowed ourselves to follow.
Great. I think on that might be a great way to end today's talk. I greatly appreciate both of your presentations and your comments. And again, thank you so much for being here today and for talking. It's been an honor. And of course, we will share this information. And please do pass on any final thoughts. Again, this was wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Adam.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye, everybody.